Hi, I'm John Holler, President and CEO of the Computer History Museum, and welcome to our newest exhibition, Make Software, Change the World. Marshall McLuhan once said that we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. But today, in the relationship between technology and humanity, much more than shaping is going on. That relationship is really transformational. And exploring that transformation is at the heart of the vision of the museum. We use history as a platform to explore that transformation. And our latest example of that is this exhibit, Make Software, Change the World. It describes stories of the way software unlocks the incredible potential of today's computers. But it's much more than that. It's about people, real people solving real life problems in ways that end up transforming all of us. A transformational story. It's modern, it's interactive, and it has people at the center of it. Our Vice President of Exhibitions, Kirsten Tashev, is here now, and she's going to take you through the exhibition.
Our visitors are amazed by the history of computing. It's a lot older than they thought and a lot more interesting. But what they want to better understand is how technology is changing their lives. And Make Software has just this in mind. It's organized into three main sections to really get at the impact of technology: perception and reality, life and death, and knowledge and belonging. Let me take you on a tour. The first section is perception and reality, and the first story is Photoshop. There's no doubt that Photoshop has changed just about everything, from photography to marketing to filmmaking. But it's also changed how we see the world, especially in journalism and other places. Like that picture of your brother golfing with the president, it might not be real. In the Photoshop gallery, you'll have a chance to create a selfie with a famous person. Let's go to the next gallery, MP3, and learn about how software is changing digital music. Here's Mark Weber, the curator of this gallery.
The explosion of the internet and MP3 and the iPod has made music something you can listen to absolutely anywhere, anytime. But there are trade-offs. Musicians have lost a lot of their income from recorded music, and some people say that the MP3 format just doesn't sound very good. You can try for yourself with this interactive, where you can listen to MP3 and compare it with vinyl and other formats. But still, I think it's, no matter what, it's pretty cool to have millions of songs in your pocket or purse.
Oh, thanks, Mark. All right, let's go to the next section of the exhibit, life and death. What could be more impactful than life and death? The next story is MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. A lot of people think it's about hardware, but it's a lot about software too. MRI saves lives, and it changes how doctors do their job. Now they can see inside of us non-invasively. Here is a touchscreen table where visitors can explore a healthy patient's MRI to an injured patient's MRI. Let's go to the next section in life and death. It's car crash simulation software, where you'll find a 2008 Ford Taurus crashed by Ford Motor Company at 35 miles per hour. Visitors can go inside the car and experience physical crash footage and compare it to simulated crash footage. Here's Dag Speister, the curator of this gallery.
Today's car designers use software that was originally designed to test atomic bombs. Using this code, called LS-DYNA, car designers can create safer and cheaper cars, all while sitting at their desk.
Thanks, Dag. All right, let's go to the third section of the exhibit, knowledge and belonging, where we learn how software is changing how we consume information and how we interact with each other. The first story is Wikipedia, where we learn about the history of Wikipedia and the Wikipedians, the people who write and edit articles. Especially now, when traditional media sources are being challenged, Wikipedia, with its crowdsourced information, is really leveling the playing field. Let's go to the next gallery, texting, where we learn that this story is much bigger than you ever imagined, and how texting is changing the developing world. Here is Mark Weber, Internet History Curator.
So around here, texting is mostly a convenience. But for many in the developing world, it is life-changing. We went to Kenya and interviewed Maasai tribespeople who are now buying and selling cows with a payment system on their mobile phones using SMS. And there are billions who never had internet connections or regular mail, who are now connected 24/7 through texting to the online world.
So you think you're great at texting. Well, in the texting gallery, we challenge you to a friendly speed texting competition. Come and see if you'll be the next Computer History Museum texting champion. The third story in Knowledge and Belonging is World of Warcraft, where we learn about an amazing game and a very unique group of people. Here's Chris Garcia, the curator of World of Warcraft.
World of Warcraft is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. But it's also a relationship engine that fosters interaction between people that leads to everything from 20,000 people conventions to romances and even marriages.
At the heart of the exhibit is the Stata Family Software Lab. Here, visitors learn about programming basics. They also explore a theater that features software makers, and they learn that software is made not just by coders, but a diverse group of people working together to change the world. And today we have some of those software makers with us. And John Haller will lead us in a conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kirsten. That was wonderful. Let me introduce the panel that we have with us today. First of all, Thomas Knoll, co-creator of Photoshop with his brother John, and Geo Hunt, who is the Executive Vice President of Corporate Operations for Blizzard Entertainment. Two very visual software companies.
Indeed.
Let me ask you a little bit about the intersection of art and technology. Steve Jobs once said that the intersection of art and technology was really the place where, as he put it, our hearts sing. So has that been your experience, and where do you think the intersection of art and technology is headed in the future?
Well, Photoshop started as a fun project that my brother and I were working on. And he was at the time working at Industrial Light and Magic in the movie industry. And he was experiencing, the magic of movies every day and how they are made. And that's had a huge influence on the sort of direction that Photoshop started initially. And so there's a huge influence of the movie industry in Photoshop. I have a personal background as an amateur photographer for many years before starting Photoshop as a teenager. And so I learned it from the still photography basis. And all those factors fed into the creation of Photoshop.
And I would just say, from our perspective at Blizzard, we really think of video games themselves as an art form, and that's certainly how we pursue them. And sure, video games are based on software and require a lot of technology, but I think for us in particular, it's the purest convergence of art and technology in producing these video game experiences. And it's the blending of art and design and storytelling and graphical visualizations of these created worlds. And so for us, that is absolutely almost, we think of it, of course, being who we are, as almost the highest form of that convergence of art and technology. There's other great forms as well, but we think about ourselves as artists every single day.
I want to ask you a question, Thomas, about one of the greatest things that can happen to any product introduced in the world, I think, is when it becomes a verb. And so to Photoshop something now as part of kind of the popular way we talk about things. When you and John were first working on Photoshop, did you ever dream 25 years later that Photoshop would be where it is today?
Well, it started out as a hobby project, actually. I was working on a PhD, and all through my school career, I really hated the process of actually getting down to writing a research paper and actually putting the words on a page and creating all that text. It seemed kind of not very interesting compared to the process of writing computer software, which made a lot more sense to me and was a lot more fun because it actually did something. It wasn't just dead words on a page. It was words that actually talked and did things and moved things on the screen. So I was sort of procrastinating on my PhD writing by working on this little fun project. And it's a really amazing thing to be able to like move pixels around and be able to make any image you want. And so I sort of showed this the software that I started working on to my brother, and he came up with a whole bunch of suggestions on stuff that he thought would be useful to add to it based on stuff he was seeing going on in the movie industry. And it sort of went back and forth for several months like that. And my brother then had the idea, maybe we could sell this. And so he's, I was kind of discouraging at first because it's a huge task to actually ship a full-blown software application. And I was just like one programmer working on it. And but I said, oh, you can show it around some various publishers and maybe get some interest. And so he spent quite a while driving around trying to find a publisher and doing lots of demos. And he sort of became the world's first expert Photoshop user, doing hundreds of demos. And eventually we found Adobe and they agreed to publish it. And but for the first year of development of Photoshop, it was sort of done as a hobby before we even decided to try to sell it. So we certainly didn't have the idea. We never had the plan going into this thing of creating what it became. So.
Oh, that's really interesting. I want to ask you about something that you said a minute ago, Gio, which is part of what Make Software, the exhibition, hopes to do is introduce people to the idea that there are real people who are behind all these creations, and obviously there are real people who are using them and whose lives are changed by them. Can you talk a little bit about what it takes to create a kind of virtual world like World of Warcraft creates, and who's behind that?
Well, certainly, like I had mentioned earlier, there's a whole team of people involved in the creation of a world like this. There's obviously game designers who actually think about the core gameplay. There's a lot of software engineering that goes into this, a lot of artists, and then a lot of just production and sound and music. It almost draws on sort of every aspect of media and art forms and combines them all into creating the virtual world. A lot of story, a lot of lore, a lot of love that goes into producing that kind of world, and it all then gets bundled into this experience. And then once it does, and once you ship the game, and once people start to play the game, a really important aspect of the experience as well is how the community of players then engage with the game, engage with one another in the game, and begin to shape that world themselves. So, we and other game publishers kind of give birth to one of these worlds, but then how they evolve, how the player community reacts to the world, how they shape the world on an ongoing basis over the years and even over the decades, we don't know how that's all going to play out oftentimes, when the first version of a game is shipped. And it's a wonderful experience to work with the community to help curate that world and that experience on an ongoing basis thereafter. So.
And how does it feel to both of you to put something out there into the world like that and let it go? I mean, it really becomes that tool that's in the hands of a lot of people, and as you said, you can't predict where it's going to go. What's that like?
There's a lot of surprises, right? You never know for sure what the players are really going to attach to, where their love is really going to be invested. There's things that you have put a lot of time and energy into that aren't always as compelling to the player community as you thought they were going to be. There's mistakes you make along the way too, and the community lets you know about that when that happens. And they do. And I mean, this is their community as much as it's our community, right? In fact, it's probably more so theirs than ours at this point. And so, we're, if anything, more custodians of the experience than the creators of the experience at this point. And so we listen very carefully to the feedback we get from the player community in terms of what the game needs next and where it should go next. And we're still creating as we go. But we couldn't, the World of Warcraft in this game and what it means to the community could not exist without the community. I mean, we couldn't do this without the love and compassion and energy that we get from the community every day.
And how about with you, Thomas?
Well, there was a time when I knew I had written every line of Photoshop 1.0, so I actually knew the program intimately. I was not the best Photoshop user at the time. My brother was. And that was probably true for the first few months after release. But as soon as it got out into the real world and people started using it, just watching it, seeing all the things that people discovered they could do with it, and stuff that I had never anticipated, my brother never anticipated, but just the power of the tools we created truly amazes me. What's possible. And over the years, more and more engineers have started working on Photoshop, and it's gotten much bigger. Did some estimates that it's probably 100 times more the size it used to be when version 1 came out. And there are now huge sections of Photoshop that I don't even know how to use. So, I know how to use more than what was in version 1, but I don't really go much beyond that in a lot of ways in terms of what features I actually use day to day. But it's always amazing to see what people are able to do with this program, and far beyond anything I anticipated when I was creating it.
We're getting some questions on the feed. I'm going to get to those, but I wouldn't call this a question. It's more of a statement. Charles writes in, "Yay, Photoshop. Without the Knolls, I'd have no career."
I've heard that many times. So.
Kirsten, here's one. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And without World of Warcraft, my son would have no life.
Kirsten, here's one for you. How did you pick the stories to include in the exhibit?
Well, that's a great question. Obviously, there are hundreds of stories, hundreds of software application stories. And really what we were trying to do with this exhibit, there were a few criteria. One was to really help visitors understand the direct impact of software on their lives. So we focus on stories that people could really connect to, either sort of in the everyday or something more dramatic like in MRI. We also wanted to show that software has changed a diversity of industries. So we chose stories that reflected that. And then just different kinds of impact. And the exhibit is designed to change over time. So we feel like this framework has a lot of legs to it, and we're hoping to tell more software stories over time.
Great. Thomas, here's one for you. We live in this kind of white-hot moment of fake news and alternative facts and so forth. This question is, Photoshop is great, but how do we keep it from becoming a tool for fake news?
Well, the key word there is it's a tool, and any tool can be used for its intended purpose and for good in the world, and any tool can be used for not so good in the world. So it really falls back to the users of the tool and the consumers of information to do their own vetting on things. And a lot of stuff you can do in Photoshop was possible before Photoshop. There's been whole exhibits on image manipulation before the days of Photoshop, and there's some images in this expo about how people were manipulating things before Photoshop. So it's always been possible. Photoshop has made it easier in a lot of ways, but it's still always the impetus is on the journalists that are reporting things to be honest, and on the consumers of news to do some validation on what they believe.
Gio, can you tell us how many people are playing World of Warcraft on any given day?
We don't actually release those numbers.
Right?
Okay. I will tell you this: the World of Warcraft community is alive and thriving. We're now 12 years into the history of this game, and we just released our newest expansion pack to the game in August, and it's doing fabulously well. It's called Legion. We have lots and lots of millions of players from around the world playing the game. I'll say it that way. How's that?
That's good.
And what's really neat, actually, also is it's not just the number of players, it's the diversity of players, both the geographic diversity and the kind of cultural diversity of players. We literally have players from all over the world playing this game, and it's really neat to see even how they interact with one another.
Kirsten, there's a question here about the software lab that you talked about. Can kids learn coding or the principles of coding in the lab?
Absolutely. So the lab is really designed to explore programming basics, but the interactives in there can take you up to a pretty sophisticated level. And one of the pleasures I've had in testing and also watching people interact with some of the interactives is that novices can really get started with something, and even expert programmers can have fun figuring out, how complicated they can make a particular sequence of code. So yeah, absolutely.
There's another one for you. With so many games to choose from, why did you pick World of Warcraft?
Actually,
Gio's very interested
I'm
in what the answer
interested
is
in
to
that
this.
well, Gio answered a lot of that by talking about how unique the community is and the diversity of players and the geographic diversity. But I'm going to invite Chris Garcia, who curated the World of Warcraft, up to help answer that question too.
It's a really fascinating realm, I use that word specifically, that Warcraft exhibits. I mean, the world of gaming is more than $100 billion a year these days. And to pull one thing, it was a difficult choice. But when you sort of look at the areas in which it goes into, the technological areas, both on the side of the servers and the companies, as well as on the individuals and what it requires for them, as well as this community aspect, which is super important because it not only drives people's lust for the game, but it gives them something that is so profound to their lives. And really, Warcraft has brought that to the front of the thing. Plus, it's just super cool. You have these wonderful fantasy world, the amazing art, the amazing music. It would almost be impossible to do it without Warcraft, as far as I'm concerned. But maybe I'm biased.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Let me ask both of you, Gio and Thomas, we're talking obviously about extremely visual programs here, and what's the next step? Is it virtual reality? Is it just a richer environment? What do you guys see as the next phase of this visual software that you're a part of?
You want to take that one first?
Well, Adobe has a number of products in the sort of imaging space. Photoshop is sort of the still image master. So that is sort of the domain that we're working in. There's certainly other things, very interesting things going on with video and other ways of capturing images and moving images and 3D images and other kinds of things. So the team I'm working on is mostly concentrating on the still image aspects. And that's not because we don't think that's the future of imaging. It's sort of the scope of the project that I'm working on. I was an amateur photographer when I was a teenager, and a lot of the things led into the development of Photoshop. But I was never really a serious amateur photographer until technology brought out the digital camera. I sort of went into this hiatus for a number of years during the early days of Photoshop, where I was creating software that was being used by a few photographers, but they were pretty hardcore because they had to scan everything, and their early printers were very difficult to use and expensive. And the two things came out, the digital camera and the inkjet printer. And suddenly it enabled Photoshop to be actually a very good photography tool. And that sort of, at that time, I sort of got re-inspired as an amateur photographer. And I started using this technology that I created a part of, but a lot of other people created other parts of it. And So camera technology has improved incredibly in the last decade. Printer technology has improved incredibly in the last 2 decades. And I'm sort of amazed at sort of how good cameras are nowadays and how good printers are nowadays. And I get to play in that realm now and actually use it for my own personal hobbies. So in terms of what's the future is, obviously there's this big movement towards smaller and smaller computers, and Adobe is starting to come out with some versions of Photoshop that run on tablets and phones, and that's sort of an interesting process in itself. In some ways, a lot of the programming techniques that I had to use in version 1 of Photoshop, I've had to reintroduce in order to get Photoshop to be efficient again, to run on these smaller devices. Because in a lot of ways, like an iPhone is about as powerful as a laptop computer was about 10 years before that iPhone came out. So a lot of the process of keeping Photoshop relevant is moving it to the current hardware as new hardware comes out. So.
Gio, how about you guys?
We get asked all the time about VR and AR, and is that the next new big technology frontier for video games? And the way we look at it is sort of wherever the world goes next in terms of these experiences and these platforms, you're almost certain to see gaming and video gaming sort of play a role in that, right? So, as large audiences start to aggregate around a particular VR or AR platform, I'm sure you'll see a real whole new evolution of a new type of gaming. I'm sure we'll be involved in some of that at some point. So I could definitely see like those platforms in particular, once they kind of get out of the exploratory stage into more of a mass market platform, also being a really interesting and compelling experience for gameplay and the creation of game universes. And I absolutely think communities will aggregate on those platforms and in that type of way. I think really the power of gaming really is so much about the power of, certainly the way we pursue it, is about this power of belonging with a community of other people and having fun with them and engaging with them. And that's why I think the kind of theme of belonging is such a really interesting one to focus on for the museum to focus on, because it's all about that belonging, and you can belong with other people playing games on like a tabletop, right? Playing old board games or something, or Dungeons and Dragons, or you can play video games on a PC or a mobile device or a console, and soon, I'm sure, there'll be very compelling gaming experiences in augmented reality and in virtual reality. I think also one of the things that certainly we see emerging sort of on the frontier of the video game space is, believe it or not, sort of a convergence back of video game and video game communities back into the real world through the advent and the growth of esports, right? Live competitions of people, team-based and individual competitions of people playing video games with one another and attracting thousands of people together to celebrate that game in the real world. So kind of at the very same time that we see this growth and virtualization and all these different platforms of gaming experiences, we're also seeing in parallel this reconvergence of people coming together in the real world to play and celebrate video gaming with other players. And it's really, really neat and really, really compelling for us.
That's an interesting contrast, yeah. So let's go from Facebook Live to Live and see if you guys in the front row especially have any questions, anything on your mind, or are you just enjoying the questions and answers coming in over the feed?
It is so good. I don't have any particular questions, but I have a question slightly towards the prospect of you're the developer of Photoshop. How do you see Photoshop today? Because it's something that millions of designers are using, and Photoshop used to be a package software. Now it's selling as a subscription software. What's your take on that? Do you think that's right to do?
Well, the transition to subscription software was actually the engineers involved in writing Photoshop were actually very much in favor of that transition. Under the sort of previous model, we would have to come up with a certain set of features every year and a half to 2 years, and they had to demo well because you had to sell the product with these and convince somebody to spend an upgrade fee to buy the new version of Photoshop, and they would like watch demos of these new features. So a lot of the engineering effort went into creating this bullet list of features for the update. And then when some percentage of the user base would upgrade and some percentage would not upgrade, so we would always have to support multiple versions going back with bug fixes and new camera support for like Camera Raw plugin. The new model is people are paying a subscription, and Adobe's pricing plans are such that subscription fee is similar to, or maybe even slightly less than, the money they would pay Adobe if they had like gone through the old upgrade cycle. And if they upgrade it most of the time, they'd actually end up paying Adobe more money. So it's not actually costing the users more, but it's encouraging users to stay current with the newest versions of our software. So the engineers like that because when they create a feature, they actually get users to use that right away. It changes the incentive for the engineers on what features they do also. And this is previously the incentive was to create features that demoed well. And now the incentive is to create features that people actually use and don't want to do without. So because if they stop finding the software useful, they stop subscribing, and then we lose our revenue stream. So our incentive now is to create software that's essential for users, and by essential, it has to be useful enough to justify the subscription cost. So I think that's a better incentive and more aligned with actual users, is to have the engineers working on things that make the product more valuable to the users, rather than more eye candy in a demo on the old upgrade model.
Dean.
Yeah, for Gio, how did you guys distill what to show from World of Warcraft here as well?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
How did you sort of distill what to show?
Oh, here at the museum?
Yeah, at the museum.
Well, I actually wasn't personally involved with that. I know some of the folks on our team were and worked very closely with the museum. So to be honest, Dean, I'm not exactly sure how the decisions were made. When I walked in here today, I was really pleased to see it. It looks beautiful. You know, some of our older stuff, some of our newer stuff. I think the guys here have done such a nice job giving tribute to everything that the World of Warcraft community has meant, both to the players and for those of us involved in publishing it. So,
Kirsten, you want to take
Yeah, I can take it. So as I mentioned, there are 3 themes that weave their way throughout all the stories, and it's history, impact, and technology. So World of Warcraft is organized around those themes as well. And obviously we had a lot of fun in the impact section, because we could look at all the ways that it's changed players' lives, and how the demographics have changed over time. And we have a great story about a World of Warcraft wedding. We also actually went and shot at BlizzCon 13, which was really fun to meet a lot of the players. And then in history, we're all history nerds here, so we like to go see how far we can go back with any story. We go back as far as we can, which allowed us to bring in some of the inspiration of Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons, and then some really early games like Zork and Adventure, and we have actually we have Adventure source code in the collection. And then really look at the history of World of Warcraft and how that started and the beginnings of the company, and see it's always interesting to learn about what we call the creation story. And then, what we were talking about earlier is the teamwork. Behind us is a gallery that emphasizes the artistry and the teamwork with the programmers and the artists and the musicians and all the things that go into creating this kind of game.
A large part of the impact of the exhibition is to raise the visibility of what software engineers do and their importance in the world. Having worked in this field for a long time, do you think that the visibility has been lacking and that good can come of raising it? And what would be, what has been lacking and what good will come of this?
Well, it's certainly nice to be able to walk into the local restaurant and not be mobbed. So I don't want to become a movie star.
After today, I don't know.
So it's kind of amazing to be able to walk into any bookstore in the country and see the Photoshop bookshelf. So, I've created, a very huge impact, enough to justify shelf space in the local Barnes & Noble and in any city in the country. But at the same time, it's nice to go through life fairly anonymously and not be a celebrity. So. I'm perfectly happy with the status quo right now, is the answer.
That's great.
For us, and the way I think about that question in terms of the impact of software engineers and the folks who are behind the creation of some of these products, again, it's not just engineering, it's a lot of art and design and everything else, and sound and music, and they get their credits on the game, the kind of scrolling credits, just like the movies when they produce a game, and so they're acknowledged in that way. But I think sometimes, and this is why I think the focus and the theme around belonging is so important, I think sometimes what the games then actually mean to the world are lost a little bit, or at least they're not so closely connected to that production experience. And Kirsten mentioned, people have gotten married through the game. Actually, the lead designer for WoW for many, many years met his wife through World of Warcraft, right? And we have so many stories of that where people have formed lifelong friendships with people that they met in the game, stories of people who have remained in contact with their kids as when they're deployed overseas, for example, have kept families together over large distances. I mean, there's all these great heartwarming stories of people who have learned to be part of a community, to lead a team, to be part of a guild within the game. And so there's developed teamwork and leadership and actually help people in their core life experience. And I think sometimes what I like so much about what the museum has done here is it's drawn that connection between these, the software and the life experience that is created through the software.
That's a great way to put it. I would just add that engineers are incredibly creative people, and they express their creativity through problem solving. I often joke that the museum is kind of the Taj Mahal of problem solving, because to make it into the museum, you really have needed to solve a problem that has produced a major impact on the world in some way. And most of the problems that get solved and then get reflected in the history of computing are problems that people were told were insoluble. So it takes a tremendous amount of creativity and trial and error and failure and success and teamwork to do what great software engineers do. And that's one of the things I think is really reflected in an impact gallery like this. That's why partly why we're celebrating the impact of software, is that it's behind the impact that we all feel are these people who are doing this incredibly creative work. So I think, to me, to answer your question, it's It is kind of a celebration of that creativity, and I think that's a nice thing to bring to light. It's an inspiring thing to bring to light. Kirsten, there are a couple more from the feed. Let me give these to you. How will students be able to engage with this new exhibit?
Well, the exhibit is designed both for school groups that will come through school visits, and there's a lot of interactivity in the exhibit, and I think our younger visitors will especially enjoy sort of the role play of trying out these different types of software and different types of impact. And then in addition, the exhibit I think is especially family friendly. It's designed for people of all ages. Middle school and above I think will especially enjoy the exhibit. It's contemporary history, so everybody has their entry point, and it's fun to see families trying different things together, and sometimes the adult is leading, and then in other times the child is leading. So I think the exhibit is designed for school groups and for families and just the general audience.
Okay. One more, and then we'll wrap up. Do you guys, I guess that means us, plan to do a museum for people who can't afford to go to the museum? This was from Esteban on the feed. And I did want you to mention the online exhibits and what we're doing and when all that goes live.
Yeah, so actually every exhibit that the museum has done, and in some ways the museum was a virtual museum first. We had online exhibits before we had physical exhibits, so it's always been in our DNA to think about people who can't physically visit. So everything that's on display in the exhibit is available online. That includes our large permanent exhibition Revolution, and online version of this exhibit will launch coming in the next few weeks. And what's fun about the online exhibit is we get to include things, in a way it's better, because we get to include things that we couldn't include on the exhibit floor because of space or time constraints. So there's extra content and both in written and in video form.
So that's at computerhistory.org, and also we do a tremendous amount of live kinds of programming like this at the museum. We've got a dedicated YouTube channel for that. That's at youtube.com/computerhistory. We've had about 7 million views of almost 200 programs on that channel so far, so feel free to check that out too. All right, we're going to wrap up now. I just want to thank Gio and Thomas. Thank you very, very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks
for
to you
honoring
guys for
us
being
by
here.
having us.
Well, it's our pleasure. Thank you. And thanks for everybody joining in.